guys? Pilot Buds here. We got an amazing video for you. Me and Brian are going to be talking about our OSHKOSH experience and what we did to plan for it, and the mistakes that we made, and also the things that we actually did that were pretty successful in keeping safety, excitement, and just overall efficiency.
Or basically a tutorial how to fly 10 hours in a small ass airplane.
Yep.
Okay, so I think we're going to start off with the whole pre-flighting process and basically obtaining the aircraft to fly there.
Right. So we have a local flight school near us and that we go to, and the thing that we wanted to keep in mind was that they actually use the aircraft for flight training. And if we take it out for, I think we were gone for about 5 or 6 days.
Yep.
So in that elapsed time, they wouldn't be making that much money. So you want to give them a heads up saying, hey, do you mind if we rent it out for this amount of time? And make sure you know it. Always be on the safer side on renting out as long as possible without obviously breaking your bank. But these are all the things that you want to keep in mind.
Yeah, we told our flight school director about 2 months before we actually went to OSHKOSH about all our plans and what exactly we were going to be doing with the aircraft. And if we hadn't have done that, we probably wouldn't have had the airplane at least we wanted to take there.
Right, we actually got one of the exact airplane that we wanted.
Yeah, the nicest aircraft in the fleet. Also, we would probably say the safest one.
Yeah.
For a cross-country flight of that sort.
Exactly. All right, we're going to be talking about flight planning.
Direct, enter, enter.
All right, so in all seriousness, we kept in mind multiple things. And one thing we want to do is have a flight plan. So we built our flight plan keeping in mind avoiding obstacles, of course, but because our general area was in the middle of bumblefuck nowhere, elevation wasn't really that much of a worry. Everything was near sea level. But we were more looking out for obstacles like towers. If we're going to fly, especially like Chicago, which we did fly nearby, we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to bump into any Chicago skyscrapers.
We flew in the corridor right next to all the skyscrapers. They're so beautiful.
It was amazing. Another thing we kept in mind was that we weren't going to bring life vests, as we didn't want to have the uncomfortability and just it's not that heavy, but just it taking up space in the airplane, because in times of emergency, having things that is restricting you from movement is not the best. Especially if you know when your bags are open, you're like, I gotta close it so things don't fly out if we're in an emergency. So the one thing we wanted to keep in mind was space in the airplane, and also what type of things we actually really wanted to bring. So we brought our second awareness electronic flight bag, which is literally for flight. And an ADS-B to help us along. Now in this case, our ADS-B was Scout, and I'm not gonna lie,
it's a piece of shit. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about something that's absolutely essential when you're gonna be doing cross-country flight plans like this. ADS-B and an electronic flight bag. We used a pretty cheap, inexpensive ADS-B called the Scout. It worked decently, but a lot of times during the flight, we would just completely disconnect from the service and not be able to have weather services, which was a really big problem because, as all of you know, OSHKOSH is taking place in the summer in Wisconsin. We were dealing with going around thunderstorms throughout the entire flight, and when you see the big thunderstorms around you and they suddenly go off your iPad,
it doesn't help.
It's not fun.
Alright, so the few things we want to mention is decision making and quote-unquote taking risks, but we don't mean that in risking anything, especially safety. One of the things we noticed was that Fort Wayne International Airport had thunderstorms just off the runway. And
it was just a shearing line that went on for like 100 miles.
Right. Noticing that the thunderstorms also went over Chicago. And we knew that we didn't want to go around Chicago because we would have to go like 200-mile diversion.
It would either be through the water, which we can't do legally,
yes,
or around Chicago, which would really have us stop again to refuel.
Right, and we didn't want to deal with a 15-hour, 14-hour flight just diverting because of weather. What we noticed was a gap happening between the thunderstorms. There was a thunderstorms down near the southwest area, of Chicago, and then there was thunderstorms right over Chicago. And we knew that those were moving over towards the east. So what we did was that we went into in the split between those thunderstorms, but there's still small cells here of thunderstorms that we still had to divert, and having the scout not working against us in this fact was not the best option. And this was kind of what I mean in risk. It didn't help us that we couldn't always see in almost pitch black night where these thunderstorm clouds were, but we also were fully aware that the thunderstorms separation was over 100 miles, and that was enough room for us not to be getting caught up in either of the thunderstorms.
Again, we just want to stress the importance of having an ADS-B. Really doing cross-country in the summer is inherently dangerous if you don't have ADS-B. So make sure you get you guys one. While we're on the topic of safety, one thing you really should think about is bringing a safety pilot. That's pretty much essential when going into OSHKOSH. You need somebody to be able to work the radios for you when you're flying the aircraft, be making sure you're in the correct airspace and you are where you're supposed to be. But most importantly, you're going to want a safety pilot to brief. If you're flying to OSHKOSH, which unfortunately we didn't get to land at OSHKOSH, we parked our aircraft in a nearby spot just because we didn't want to get stuck in the mud.
Yeah.
But if you are flying to OSHKOSH, you have almost 20 pages of briefing, no TAMs. And you're going to want to be able to make sure that not only you are aware of everything you need to be doing, your safety pilot is as well.
Right. So another thing we wanted to keep in mind was what type of airports we wanted to land at. Was it really short airports? Knowing that we didn't want to deal with short field takeoffs, we wanted something a little longer, including that knowing that having an FBO just there, and we actually opted for nicer FBOs, knowing the cost of the fuel was going to be just a little bit more. I think it was like 70 or 60 cents more per gallon than our own original airport.
And the main reason we did that is because the FBOs we were stopping at, for the most part, were 24/7 FBOs.
Right.
Most are not. Most are 9 to 3 or 9 to 5. So just remember that. And we realized that we maybe had to have landed for quite a bit amount of time, which at one point we had to stop and land for about 4.5 hours because of the weather.
Yep.
So if that had become an overnighter, having a 24/7 FBO with a pilot lounge can really actually save you on those expenses of having to go to a hotel instead, or the pain of sleeping in your airplane.
Yeah. Alright, so now comes the day of the flight. So one of the things we realized was the weight. We were going to bring luggage that we're going to be using for 6 days, clothing, our flight bags, camera gear, all that stuff was coming with us, and we wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to weigh us down, knowing that it's summer and we were going to deal with humidity and high temperatures up to like 80 to 90 degrees.
It adds up quick in a small aircraft like that.
Whoo! So the first thing I wanted to mention was that we were looking at the weather, and we noticed that there was thunderstorms all over Wisconsin, and they were severe. Actually, so
That's
severe.
to cause tornadoes.
Yes, tornadoes. That's not fun. So we were keeping an eye out for weather from the days upcoming to the flight, but also especially the day of the flight. Trying to see how can we avoid it and what are alternative airports, because I was pretty sure we were going to alternate multiple times.
We actually did a few times.
Yes, we did.
Okay, now on to a very important segment. This is essential to have as a pilot. Personal minimums. And we almost came very, very close to our personal minimums. And by personal minimums, I'm talking about fuel reserve and weather mainly.
Right. So one of the things we noticed during our flight was overflying by Milwaukee towards the west side of it. I noticed some fog, low visibility happening below us. But I will be honest with you, I did notice clear terrain to our left and possibly clear terrain in front of us. But like I said, it was really dark and pitch black, so I didn't want to confirm that unless I actually saw more visibility.
Again, having an ADS-B so you can check your weather in flight more easily is going to be very, very essential.
One of the things I also noticed was that Milwaukee was reporting IFR, but it was reporting VFR further ahead. But we were not in IFR conditions in this case, to make it any clear. We were still able to see up to like 16 kilometers.
Perfectly VFR. We were just worrying about the future.
Right. We were trying to see if the low mist happening was going to happen further on ahead of us, which it was not, and we were continuing, and that's when we made the go-ahead to continue the flight.
And we actually had a pretty serious conversation about maybe declaring an emergency, because we were starting to be about an hour's worth of fuel, which, as you know, the VFR requirements is 30 minutes, 45 minutes at night, I believe.
Yes.
We were very much approaching that. As well, we had, in some places, deteriorating weather. So we had a flight plan filed, and as well, we were talking with ATC,
Right.
but we were debating whether to let them know about our situation. Since we believed that it was getting better, we just made sure that they kept flight following on us, and we went to the closest airport that we could get fuel at.
And we did.
Okay, so everybody knows about get there-itis. I wouldn't say we really experienced that on the way there. We were just happy to be in the airplane.
Right.
But I'd most certainly say that we experienced that on our way back. We shot the whole thing one way, only to stop to land to refuel.
Yes.
And let the aircraft cool down for maybe 30 minutes.
We definitely did not let the aircraft cool down. We did not let ourselves cool down, and especially that we didn't even give ourselves time to eat, except for the one time we were just we absolutely have to eat. We need energy right now.
It's not a smart idea, but it happens to the best of us. All we can say on that is, again, follow your personal minimums, know yourself,
right.
And think about not only how you feel now, but how you might feel in a few hours. If you're not feeling well, maybe your stomach's getting sick, maybe you have to use the bathroom, anything like that, you should err on the side of caution and add more waypoints, more layovers to stop at.
Right. Even though it might be more costly, as everyone wants to save more money, in this case, it's not worth losing your life over it, and including that. Luckily, on the way back, we did not experience any sorts of abnormalities or anything like that, and including that, I actually would say that was probably one of the easier flights I've ever done.
Yeah. Besides the occasional dodging of thunderstorms and landing in the middle of bumblefuck nowhere.
Yep. I wouldn't say it was at all, difficult or extreme in any sense.
But again, you don't want to get there-itis, be flying on your way back home, maybe be a little bit low on gas, and then thunderstorms pop up around you. That's just not a situation you want to put yourself in, especially when you have fatigue, you're about to get home. You put yourself in the position where you might get into something bad.
Oh yeah. I think we landed with definitely an hour and a half of fuel left, and we landed about the same area, so...
And we could have totally skipped the stop and not have been conservative on fuel, but again, with what happened to us in the first flight, we were a little bit nervous about that.
Yeah,
so
we landed in an airport even shorter, even though we know that the final leg was going to be longer. But yeah, safety is number one priority, guys.
Safety is number one
Priority.
We're getting copyright strike. Fuck. Okay, so I can't even describe to you how much detail we went into fuel planning. Because we know with our aircraft, the fuel gauges are not very accurate.
Right.
So we took a very conservative estimate of about 11 gallons per hour, which, from my understanding, a Piper Archer burns around 8 to 10 gallons. So it is a pretty conservative estimate.
Right.
And what did we still have, Borna?
We still had a fuel emergency. So the story that we're going to come out here, we're being straight up, this is exactly what happened, because first, we want to make sure that you know that this is one of the things that does... This is one of the most common accidents that happen. Fuel empty. What?
Not having gas in your can, buddy.
So, one thing we wanted to mention was our mistakes and what we did. So, this was literally the first leg of our flight. And as we were flying there, we hit the 4th hour mark. And, actually, that was a lie.
About 3.5.
We were at 3.5, and we still had another 30 minutes until our next airport. We were noticing that our fuel gauges were still low, but we also didn't want to rely on them knowing that they give inaccurate readings, and we were just like, there's no way, because we knew our airplanes had total 5 hours of fuel, even with the conservative amount, and we were at the 3.5 hour mark, so we should have an extra hour of fuel by the time we land. We were wrong.
We were most certainly wrong.
One thing we noticed is that the gauge was just not...
They were fluttering, basically, the needles in the gauge.
Right, and that means that it was that light in the fuel tank. There's literally almost nothing in it.
Just basic explanation of the physics of that. The way that the fuel gauge works, very kind of roughly explaining it, it's just a bobber that goes up and down with the fuel level. And when you have very low amounts of gas, the turbulence in the aircraft will make that bobber shake up and down a lot more than if it was full.
Right.
So we could tell that we were running very low on fuel by that occurrence.
Because anytime we would hit turbulence, that thing would just react like that.
Anyways, long story short, we chose to land immediately.
Yes.
We go to the nearest towered airport just because we wanted a little bit of safety with that.
Yes, and we did let them know that we had a low fuel.
We never actually declared a fuel emergency, which if they had told us to go around, we
would have called it. We would have definitely called it.
Most certainly. However, thankfully it didn't have to come to that, but we did land.
And air traffic control also took it seriously. They even held up a commercial aircraft for about 10 minutes until we landed. They could have easily taken off way prior to us, but they made safety #1 priority for us.
We landed with about 4 gallons or less of fuel, which is absolutely nothing.
It is nothing. And knowing that we only have 2 gallons of usable fuel, that was kind of scary. Knowing this, that we were after this experience, it ingrained into us that we're going to be even more conservative on fuel planning, but also just making sure we don't even push the aircraft to those actual limits. So,
again, we checked the POH of our aircraft. We were very conservative with our flight planning, and it still happened to us. So if it happened to us, it can happen to you.
Right.
All right, communication.
All right, it's always nice having a pilot along, just tag with you. It's just always
tag
much
with
easier.
you, man. I flew the airplane halfway there.
Okay, all right, fine. Anyways, so we want to make it clear to you that having a second pilot to just bounce off ideas is so much more efficient and can help you communicate better ideas rather than you flying by yourself, you making the decision all on your own. But the thing is, obviously as a pilot, you're trained to do those on your own, especially as a private pilot, knowing that you're training and you'll be in situations flying by yourself. So even though we are trained to deal with situations on our own, it doesn't, it just overall safer to have a second pilot.
It's obvious that having a safety pilot reduces your load and just gives you that mental clarity to think ahead, be ahead of the aircraft.
Right. Airlines do it, why can't we?
On that point though, you want to make sure one person is set as pilot in command.
Right.
But as well, you want to make sure the safety pilot is always there to be able to voice their concerns. And if there's ever a concern, especially to the safety or jeopardy of the flight,
right,
you should err on the side of caution.
Yeah, our airplanes are not dual pilot at all. They're literally pilot in command, and pilot in command is the pilot in command. And you want to make it clear who's flying that airplane. But second to that, you want to make sure that your guy is aware of his surroundings because he should be on par with what's happening with you.
Yeah, no sleeping in the cockpit.
I have a picture of that, bro. I'm pulling that up.
Insert. As well, for young pilots like us, I was about 50 hours total time, which is about nothing. Borna, I would say, about 70, 80 hours total time,
I think it was 90 at the time because I literally ended up with like 116 by the end of the flight.
Yeah, I ended up with about 70 something. But what we're trying to say, even if you're low time, if you do the work you're supposed to do, you study for your flight, you absolutely can do.
Yeah.
So yeah, we would recommend this for anybody as a learning experience. You will come out a better pilot, 100%.
Alright. We'll catch you guys in the next one.
See you guys.